Hello everyone, today I'm just painting something for funsies. It's not for a project, it's not for clients, just me jamming out in the dead of the night with my paints. Like if it's really important to match a color to a fabric, then I will almost as much as possible paint during the day. Because daylight, bright sunlight is really the best light to match colors. But I don't really care about that right now, so it's like, dead o'clock in the morning. I have all my studio lights on. It's pretty bright. And here we go. This paper I'm using is new to me. It is the STRATHMORE 500 series, the one with the white cover. It's one of their more expensive papers. And I've used different papers, including watercolor paper, from STRATHMORE. Their yellow cover series is their student budget brand series, and then their brown cover, the 400 series, is like kind of in between their professional grade and their student grade. I've used both of those, and I like them in varying degrees. So when I saw the sale on the white cover papers, I snapped up a bundle, and this is a 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, and I like it. The paint dries really fast on it, and that is not a good or bad thing. It's just what is your preference when you're working. So it's just a note to self sort of thing. When I'm trying to decide the right paper for a project, I'll just keep in mind that the STRATHMORE dries really fast, and maybe I don't want to use that for wet on wet technique where I want a little more playtime with stuff wet on my page. The paint that I'm using today are the HOLBEIN Artist Gouache. I got a 12-piece set when I was in Japan this past spring, and I've been experimenting and testing all summer, and I've really been enjoying them, so I've just kept going and playing with these. I am going to be playing with two Winsor Newton gouaches later on, the permanent white and the rose TYRIEN, because I don't have a rose TYRIEN in the HOLBEIN set. But all the other colors I mentioned today are going to be HOLBEIN. The skin is a combination of burnt sienna with ultramarine deep with a dab of black. The hair is just straight up black. It's the ivory black. And I don't know if you noticed it before, but when I'm mixing paint colors, I always mix at least two dilutions of the same color. I actually start by mixing the shadow color, and then once I'm happy with that color, I will move some of that paint into a separate well, add a little bit of water to it to get my base color. The thing I love about painting is how I can get more shades and depth and whatnot, and I'm not limited to the 2 or 3 marker colors I have on hand. I know you can layer markers and stuff like that, but mixing colors in a variety of different colors and 6 or 7 shades really quick just by adjusting a tiny dab of water or a tiny dab of another color is really part of the magic of painting. And so I love especially painting skin tones because I can just have 6 or 7 colors adding a little bit of water for this and then adding a little bit of black for just the tiny touches of the darkest shadows and stuff like that. Let's talk brushes for a second. Right now I'm using a really cheap oil brush with very stiff bristles, and I use this kind of brush, I have several of them, to create all kinds of different textures. When I pair this kind of stiff bristled brush with dry gouache, gouache that doesn't have a whole lot of water in it, I can get these soft, feathery textures. Right now I'm painting with the permanent white and rose TYRIEN from the Winsor Newton gouaches. You can see the tubes at the top of the screen. And I'm painting using soft flick strokes so that I'm not getting smooth streaks of color, but the uneven, soft, bristly, feathery sort of look that I'm trying to get for feathers. I always have a sheet of the same painting paper next to me whenever I'm working so that I can test my colors and texture and opacity. And sometimes, you know, in cases like this, I'll like try painting a flower or whatever before I move on to the final. I'm not doing that much testing on this one because I'm just doing this for funsies and I'm not really all that invested in the outcome like I would be if this was for a specific client. Normally, when I am mixing light colors, like a light pink in watercolors, whether it's gouache, watercolor, ink, whatever, I just, you know, take the color and I add water to it. That's the basis of watercolor, right? But in this case, I wanted to make a little bit opaque so that I could cover some of that, you know, the skin flower edge and overlap it a little bit to make sure I don't leave any white gaps. I mean, there are white gaps in the flowers, but I meant like white gaps where the flower meets the skin. And so I added a bit of the white to make my base pink paint a little bit more opaque. And I'm adding more of the rose TYRIEN to the flowers. And I'm doing it before the base layer dries so that I can get a little bit of kind of the softness that wet on wet techniques will give you. I didn't want it to look perfectly stripy, swirly. I didn't want it to look like, you know, soft serve ice cream cones or anything, you know. Back to brushes. So when I am painting large areas of flat color like skin tone, or if I'm filling in the base for large garments, skirts, coats, whatnot, my favorite brushes to use are the authentic sable round brushes. The brand that I have is Princeton, but there are a lot of good brands out there. And they're the red handle brushes you see on the right-hand side of the screen. And I have several sizes. I have a 12, an 8, and a 4, I believe, of the round shape brushes. And those are my favorite because it's got that super fine point that I can use for detail work, but the side of it is fat so that I could fill in spaces really quickly. And the reason why I prefer authentic over synthetic for large fill areas is because those bristles retain more water. And so I can scoop up more watercolor and just like slap it down and fill in large areas quickly. Whereas if I'm just constantly going back and forth, palette paper, palette paper, paper, palette, palette paper, paper, palette, palette paper, I'm gonna start getting these weird, like dried patches before I'm filling in the rest. And it's super annoying to be all Speedy Gonzalez with my painting. So here I am mixing the Holbein emerald green with a liberal dab of the lemon yellow for the leaves. And I wanted to make sure that the leaves were on the yellow side, the base of it, because red violet and yellow green are complementary colors and would make the other color pop even more in contrast with each other. I'm going to get a little bit bluer with some of the shadows, but the base is going to be a more yellow green. I know that color theory is typically not students' favorite class. I taught it for a few years. I enjoy teaching it and I enjoy the subject. I am aware I am in the minority. But y'all, it is important, okay? It helps you figure out what colors to mix to get the colors that you want when you're painting. It helps you in times like this when you're like, oh yeah, I want the red violet of the flowers to really pop, so I'm going to make my green leaves more on the yellow side because those complementary colors are really going to make them pop. And the vines and straps I'm going to do, I'm going to make darker and duller green so that they recede. They're not as prominent as the flowers and the leaves are in this costume, right? So all those elements together, you know, start making for better illustrations because you're understanding how colors work together and how they look good together. And even when I first chose to do this really dark skin tone, I was thinking that my flowers were going to be light and bright, and that a really dark skin tone would also help make my flowers pop. And so those are the kinds of things that you learn in a good color theory class, like those separate small lessons that you use on an everyday basis. For me, color theory is like taking a really good grammar class where you learn where to put your commas, you learn where to put your semicolons and what a dependent clause is versus an independent clause. And you learn all those minor things, all those little things. And then when you're writing sentences, things flow, punctuation is easy, grammar is easy because you've already got those little skills drilled into your mind and you don't have to think about it as you're writing, and so that you can focus on the content. I added a little bit of sequins to my headband. You guys know I have a couple of sequin videos already. I'll probably pop a link to those somewhere. And now I am adding little green shadows. I'm painting the viney straps with the permanent green deep Holbein gouache, and I'm mixing that permanent green deep with some of my previous greens to get shade variations in my leaves, and then adding a touch of the ultramarine deep to get an even darker green for the shadows. And don't forget to pay attention to the paint color and how it lightens up as it dries. Okay, look at the greens now, how much lighter they were than a second ago. When I have an element that's lopped off the edge of the paper, I like to continue the stroke by putting a little piece of paper behind it and continuing to draw upwards so that I'm not lopping off my pencil strokes in a weird way, but letting it naturally fall off the edge of the paper. I am adding my dry elements, my individual little feathers from my plumes with color pencils. This is Prismacolor in Lavender. Consistently using my pencil strokes to create all the little individual feathers. And now I am adding a little bit depth with some darker cores of the plumes with Prismacolor Mulberry. I have a very detailed feathers tutorial. I'll drop the link in the info box below. Although at this point, that's just redundant because you guys know that all my tutorials are super detailed. You will know that it's an imposter when my tutorial is like super fast and vague, right? Now I am taking a white gel pen and adding sparkle crosses to the sequins. I have decided that this showgirl outfit can't really be a proper showgirl outfit if it doesn't sparkle, like a lot. So yeah, showgirl outfits are not really known for their delicious subtleties. So I'm going to add rhinestones all over the place, in the feathers, in the flowers, and I'm using a size 0 round brush with opaque white gouache to do this. Another note on brushes, when I'm doing tiny detail work where playing with the paper and playing with the water and, you know, those effects is not that important, you know, I use synthetic brushes because they're cheaper and I can use a bunch of them. And I have a bunch of these size 0 to size 4 round shape brushes. And I use them for all this little kind of detail work. And now I'm adding a little grass fringe so that the fringe shimmies when the showgirl dances, with 2 different colors of color pencil, green and dark green. I'm sorry, grass green and dark green. And yeah, I add the 2 colors to, again, add more depth. Shimmy, 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 Cocoa Puff, something, something, whatever, whatever. And I am going to do a tutorial eventually on moving drapes, on how to make drapes move when the person moves, walks, dances, twirls around, and that includes fringe. And now I'm adding sparkle crosses with a white charcoal pencil. This one is General's brand. And yeah, I used a white gel pen on the headband, but yeah, like I will do almost anything to not use a white gel pen. They kind of make me crazy because the ink doesn't flow like I want them to. And now I'm adding sparkle crosses in my feathers with a pencil, because if I did it in white, they wouldn't really show up. I mean, look at the placement and look how much it bleeds into the white of the paper. Like the sparkle crosses wouldn't show up, right? So now I'm just sparkle crossing like a crazy person, because you guys know sparkle crosses are my favorite. Oops, little thigh mishap I'm gonna fix right there. And I'm done.